Okay, hello.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Can you please type in the chat box to let us know that you can hear us?
Good, thank you. So,
Thank you. So, today we're going to talk about discovering parts and patterns. And as always, we'd like to thank our wonderful teacher, John Jones, for all of his really excellent and loving, kind facilitation. And we're also wanting to thank Inside Timer for offering their platform for our workshops. We're very grateful for that. And if you like the workshop, we would appreciate any donations that go to us and also, of course, to Inside Timer. So, before we begin the topic of discovering parts and patterns, one thing that I wanted to share with you that is important is that in the process of discovering our own parts and patterns, resistance can come up. And the resistance can come up in the form of essentially rejection or trying to suppress or to repress those parts or not become aware of the parts simply because we have this subconscious fear of change and also we react in self judgment when we realize that we do have parts and patterns. So being aware of that can help you as you uncover parts and patterns to remain grounded, to feel at peace about the process of discovering your parts and patterns so that they can be cleared and healed.
and today we're going to actually treat this as a real workshop. We're going to help you fully discover or more fully discover and map a part or pattern, which we're using as synonyms. A part, a pattern, you could call it a karma, you could call it a tendency, you could call it a personality trait. So today we're actually going to help you identify a part and pattern that is limiting your quality of life, and then we're going to help you energetically sort of map it out. We're going to help you understand the different ways in which it comes up and what it's made of, and basically the parts of the pattern uh, that and how it manifests. So this is going to be a hands-on workshop, and if you have a piece of paper and a pen or anything that you can write with, that will be really helpful for this workshop. And we appreciate the back and forth dialogue. We appreciate your chats, your messages in the chat box. So please feel free to ask questions, and we'll do our very best to answer them. And we really also want to help you to guide you through this entire process from beginning to end.
So, we're going to begin with a short meditation to help us get in touch with our parts and patterns and to be open to resolving our parts and patterns, to uncovering them and then resolving them. So, if you'll begin by placing your hands on your heart, closing your eyes, and grounding yourself in your body. Feeling whatever you're feeling physically, mentally, emotionally, energetically, spiritually, allowing yourself to feel what you feel, to be present to what you feel, and to be in your body with the intention of relaxing, of opening, of expanding your awareness. And from this state of relaxation, of groundedness, of openness, of expansion, connecting to the intention of discovering any part, any pattern in yourself, in your life, that you want to clear and release. Something that when you've cleared it, your life will become easier. So opening yourself up to that, to discovering today a part or a pattern in yourself that is non-optimal and that you wish to change. And you can, for instance, say, I choose to discover a part or a pattern today that I want to change. And connect to that intention in your heart. What it would be like to live without this part or pattern.
Recognizing that nobody is better than or less than anyone. And that there's no bad part or pattern in you. That there are only parts and patterns, and we can choose the ones we clear, heal, and release. And that's not a sign of being bad or wrong. It's just a sign of evolution, a process of growth and transformation and clearing the past conditioning and programs and that everyone carries in some way or another. We're not discovering any bad parts of ourselves. We're simply discovering parts of ourselves, dynamics. None are good or bad or right or wrong. They're just patterns. And being open to, from your consciousness, to see, to discover any patterns and parts of yourself without judgment, with full acceptance, and with complete self-love. Loving all of the patterns in you, accepting all the patterns in you. And loving and accepting all of the patterns in all people. And appreciating this process of learning our way through our patterns, of discovering and clearing and healing our patterns, so that we may experience deep and lasting inner peace and love and joy and clarity, and achieve what we most want to achieve in life, and experience what we most want to experience in life, in our heart and soul.
So with these understandings, these insights, and this intention in your mind and in your heart, let's begin this workshop.
So, why discover our parts and patterns? To free ourselves from pain and suffering. All suffering, all pain, comes from our parts and patterns. We have a question asking us to turn the volume up a bit. And we'll speak a little louder and see if you can turn the volume up on your end. And if we speak a little louder, that should be really helpful. Let us know if you can hear us better now. Okay. So our parts and patterns are very much our pain and suffering. And when we clear our parts and patterns, we clear our pain and suffering. You can probably trace any area of life where you experience suffering. You can probably bet that you have some patterns that are involved and contributing to the suffering.
So, when we become aware, when we discover our parts and patterns, it allows us to become more present and therefore to be more conscious rather than operating from the same programs, the same habits, the same ways of seeing the world, the same way of experiencing ourselves, the same way of experiencing others. So, really, the discovering of parts and patterns is very, very beneficial because it allows us to be in the present moment and consciously aware of everything that's unfolding in the present moment, and therefore better able to navigate life, to navigate relationship dynamics, and to understand the process of life in a much more beneficial and supportive manner.
If we go into a part or pattern, it means we've become unconscious. No part or pattern is conscious. Any part or pattern is only is limited and is looking at reality through a lens. So it is not conscious. To be conscious, we must look at reality with no lens. So when our parts and patterns come up in relationship and work, during the day, in the morning, in the evening, when we're eating, when we're cleaning up, they render us less conscious. Would you like to talk about the mosaic?
Yes. So, if you've ever seen a mosaic in a church or in maybe a museum or somewhere, if you've seen a mosaic and you come close to the mosaic, you might become aware that the mosaic is made up of tiny little pieces that are not that have many different sizes and different colors, different dimensions, shape. And this metaphor of a mosaic is very helpful because if you look at your patterns, if you look at yourself as a mosaic of parts and patterns, it can give you a way of understanding that your whole self, and I'm not talking about the soul here, I'm talking about the personality or the identity,
the
ego. It's made up of those tiny little pieces, some bigger than others, and also that mosaic is alive, meaning that patterns will get triggered and become evident and become more, let's say, more active based on the environment, based on sensory stimuli. And so the mosaic is like, it's like a composite, an unfolding, a dynamic composite of those parts and patterns. Of course, that mosaic of parts and patterns is not really you. Again, it's your ego. And the more you know that mosaic, the more you get to understand it and map it and learn it, the more you can actually experience yourself in wholeness and in oneness instead of fragmentation, meaning in the mosaic, what happens is imagine that mosaic and like you're in one part at one point in your day, then you go into another part, then into another part, and we're shuffling from part to part to part to part, bringing about a sense of fragmentation instead of wholeness and oneness, and also potentially some waste of energy or drain on your energy because you're going from one part to another without necessarily having a this sense of cohesion and coherence with your main intention in your life.
An example is if we had a misunderstanding with someone that we love, and then we say, okay, I'm going to go, resolve it. I'm going to go apologize and try to understand and try to work through this. And then you go so that part of you becomes dominant in your system, right? So you're this mosaic of parts, and a part of you becomes dominant in it. And that part says, I want to resolve this. I want to say I'm sorry. I want to understand where they're coming from. And then you go and you say, I'm so sorry. I really want to understand where you're coming from. And the other person is still angry at you, and they say something mean. And as soon as they blame you or yell at you or say something mean, then you go into another part that yells back and blames back and says and gets upset. So you see, in any given moment, we can have an intention. We can be in a part that has a good intention, and then another part with another intention can take over and become dominant. And that is an explanation, a sort of model of the different moods that we go throughout the day. And you might find that during the week, like on Mondays, at the end of Sunday and on Monday, you're really not in a good mood because of work. It's the beginning of the work week, and then by Thursday or Friday, you're in a good mood and starting to enjoy the weekend. Or in the mornings, maybe you're a morning person and you wake up in a good mood in the morning. Or maybe you're not a morning person and you wake up in a bad mood in the morning. And maybe at lunchtime you love lunchtime. Or maybe you just try to, get through lunch as quickly as possible. You don't even eat lunch. So these are all examples of parts. And it's interesting because we often allow our parts to define who we think we are, to define our self-image, to define who we see when we look in the mirror. So like people will say, oh, I'm a morning person. And another person will say, I'm not a morning person. And truly, that's not necessarily true. It does mean that they have a part that becomes triggered and active in the morning. And therefore, maybe then they're grumpy in the morning. Is that who they are, though? Or is it just a part or pattern? And actually, this is very, there's great potential in understanding this because it frees you to shape your own experience of life and who you are, rather than keeping you stuck in a self-image, an identity that truly you haven't even created for yourself. Because, for example, the morning person might take after their mother or father. So they've inherited that quality from their mother or father. And the person who's not a morning person maybe inherited that from the mother and father. So they've inherited that quality. And so another example is like they have been teaching for so long and now they're starting to change that women are not as good at math than men. And so, of course, women develop a part or pattern that believes that they're not as good as math. And so then we have less women in fields associated with math and the sciences. Now that's changing. Why is that changing? Because people realized it's baloney that women are bad at math. That was just a program, a belief. Still, probably, hundreds of thousands of women, millions of women have adopted this pattern, this identity, this personality, where they're not good at math because it's been pressed down upon them, in a sense, or conditioned into them through teachers and society. So how many of these parts are defining our quality of life and our potential from morning to night? And we would say that all suffering and all negative emotions stem from conditioned parts and patterns. So truly, none of our suffering is our own, and that there is the potential for human beings to be free from all parts and all programs and all patterns, and to be free from all of their suffering. And to heal all suffering completely, of course, takes time. That said, you can start with the biggest rocks in your shoe, the biggest parts and patterns. And just doing so will change your life. It will change what's possible for you. It will change what you experience. And it will free you from the suffering that those parts and patterns used to bring into your life.
So, in the discovery of parts and patterns, it can be very useful to realize that a lot of our parts and patterns are actually subconscious. Not only are they subconscious, meaning that we don't know that they exist. So you might be aware of some of your parts and patterns right now. And there are many others that may exist that you're not aware of. So this workshop is really about understanding how to become aware of those parts and patterns that are subconscious to us through a very rigorous and grounded process, practical process. And also another thing that's important to realize, even the parts and patterns that you are aware of, that you realize, oh yes, in the morning I get grumpy, or oh yes, in relationship dynamics I tend to be judgmental, or I tend to be conflictual. While you may be aware of that as a kind of an overall understanding of it, or an awareness of it, in the times that you go into your part, or you go into your partner pattern, you do not know that you are in it. So it's very, very interesting, which is why we're doing this workshop, because there's this, when we're in the part actively and we haven't mapped it, we haven't understood the part or the pattern, it's unconscious to us. And therefore we speak from it, we act from it, we continue to play out the program from that part and pattern, and therefore to get the same result. And oftentimes you'll see that the way that this unfolds, we don't realize that it has happened until like maybe a minute in, or maybe 5 minutes in, or maybe even a day in. And then we realize, oh,
yeah,
I was so triggered. And I said all these, things that I don't really mean. And that part, just that said in that moment, we're not realizing what we're doing. And that's very important, because now that understanding gives you fuel to actually do proactive work on the parts and patterns, which is, again, that's the main intention of this workshop, is to give you a method, a way to go about discovering your parts and patterns, so that then you're not surprised. So when the trigger comes to the pattern or the part, instead of going unconscious and going right back into it, yelling, or being judgmental, or believing that your reality is the reality, because in the part, that's what it's like when we go unconscious. We believe that what we're experiencing is true and real, when it's not. So when you do preemptive work, preventative work, then you remain conscious. And when the part gets triggered, now you have the opportunity, instead of reacting from that part and getting the same result again and again and again, so being in that same vicious cycle, instead you can respond and realize, oh, this is that part, oh, this is that pattern, and this is what it feels and what it wants, and I'm going to clear it, and then go back to being conscious in this dynamic instead of reacting unconsciously.
And there are two main obstacles that people face that often get stuck in when mapping their ego and all of its parts and patterns. And that is, number one, they assume that they know themselves. How many of us are taught to believe that, we know ourselves, and we know ourselves better than anyone? Now, of course, you have the capacity to know yourself completely, and you are definitely, it is very important that this process is your process in every way. And human beings don't know their subconscious. They don't know, they can't see all their subconscious parts. Our subconscious ego parts and personalities are not visible to us. And if we assume that we know all parts of ourselves, then we'll never gain the benefit of being able to discover the subconscious parts of ourselves. And to do so requires humility. It requires saying, I realize that, the conscious mind is 5%, the subconscious mind is 95%, and so there's still 95% of myself to discover. And every percent that I discover is a percent that I'm more empowered, more self-aware, more accountable, and I have greater decision-making capacity and greater free will.
And greater capacity to attain your intentions and goals, because whatever intention or goal you have in your life that is not unfolding in the way that you intended to, it comes from parts and patterns. If your parts and patterns were in alignment with what you want, with what you truly want, then what you truly want you would receive. It would manifest. So there's always this dynamic where consciously we want something, and subconsciously there's going to be elements that are not aligned with that. And those are our subconscious parts and patterns.
And that's so important, is to be able to look at your life and whatever your frustrations are. No one's life here is perfect, or else you'd just be, sitting, meditating, and blissing out right now. So, or just in inner peace. And everyone has opportunity to enhance their lives in many ways. And wherever our lives aren't in optimal balance, wherever we feel frustration or anger or sadness or desire, or lack or non-fulfillment or sick even, these are all those experiences, all those areas of life are pointing back, reflecting back to us a part or pattern of ourselves that we can become aware of. And that's part of living accountably. It's to say, the experiences that I have in life and in relationship, the suffering in those experiences, the lack, it's not because of some institution or because of some person it's because I'm carrying and energizing a part or pattern, and I'm doing so unconsciously. And so I'm going to set about choosing to discover, to learn in a really humble way these parts and patterns of myself. And I'm going to embrace this process rather than fight the process and try to act like I know everything, for example. And how long, my love, must we do that for? How long must we remain humble and keep discovering? Like, once you have your meditation where you experience complete inner peace and then you go back into the world, are you finished? As long as it takes, until we've worked through all of our parts and patterns and all of our karmas. And to constantly be open to discovering new parts and patterns.
Yes, and the way that Dexter is describing this process, that is part of the process of enlightenment, discovering our parts and patterns so that we have less suffering, less pain, less dysfunction, less imbalance, is really part of the process of becoming enlightened. So enlightening our parts and our patterns, shining light on them so that we might be more in alignment with the truth.
And this workshop is meant to facilitate your process of enlightenment, because we are literally shining the light of consciousness, of your consciousness, onto your parts and patterns, and how they're all connected, and how they operate, and how they come up, and how they take over our systems, and how then we do stuff from them that we so believe is true. And that's the irony, is that the unconscious part and pattern is actually unconscious, and it comes up, and when it's up, we just believe in it because we think it, we feel it, and we act and react from it. And in truth, becoming in the moment, once a pattern is triggered, to get out of it, you must essentially face the idea that what feels true and what you think is true in that moment is actually not.
Yeah, and that's very that can be very challenging, because when that feeling comes up, when there's an energy there and the feeling is there, it's going to define the way that we experience reality. So now the experience is defined by the way that we feel, and until we've changed the way that we feel, we can see things differently. We can have different thoughts. We can't make different choices. Or at least it's very difficult when we're in those dense energies. And so when we work on that preemptively, which is why it's so, the preemptive and preventative is so important, then we're working at the level of the energy. We're changing the energy. We're changing the feelings and the emotions. And if the feelings and emotions are changed, then the pattern begins to be dismantled and dissolve. And therefore, if we're not in that reality of the feeling emotion reality, then something else we can have an insight, we can have an understanding, we can start to see what is, instead of seeing reality through the lens of what we feel. And what we feel is stored in that part or pattern, or it's part of that part or pattern.
Yeah, and it comes from our parents and their parents and their parents. So it's not consciousness. And yet here it is, defining our thoughts and emotions and decisions and results. So that's an opportunity. And Juan said in a comment, "Thank you so much for this amazing teaching." Heart, 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 heart. Thank you, Juan. Love to you also. So a quick reference point, something to contemplate. Notice how when you wake up at 4 a.m., 5 a.m., like early in the morning, how gentle things are. If you woke up from a nightmare or stressful sleep, but when you have a calm sleep, and when you first wake up from a really calm sleep, how peaceful and gentle you are, and kind to yourself. You're usually kind and cuddling in the bed, and then the day starts, and all of the typical triggers, the phone, the meetings, the agenda, all get up and running, and you start interacting with people and driving and traffic and honking. And all of that awakens all of our parts and patterns and brings them to the surface. And then we're in like the daily stress.
Because the parts and patterns have associations with all things in the environment until you've worked through them, and therefore those associations cease to be. And therefore when a trigger comes up, it no longer brings that part up into its reactive cycle.
One last reference point we want to share before giving you some examples is that this process of discovering our ego, of the subconscious parts of ourselves, is a process that we do in sort of blindly. Like imagine if there was a person on the beach who was invisible, an invisible person. You can't see it. You can't see them, but what you can do is you can like throw some sand on them, and you can see how the sand falls on them. And that's kind of what it's like to map and discover our subconscious parts and patterns. We must use the environment and all the information we can get to basically map out these invisible dynamics. And so let's give you some examples, and please give us some examples too of parts and patterns of yours of someone you're in a relationship with that's not on this meeting.
and also as another point of reference that's important, you can be sure that you're in a part or a pattern if you are in a negative emotional state. So if you're having negative thoughts, negative emotions, negative feelings about something, you are in a part. You are not consciously aware in the present moment. You are basically projecting something onto reality.
So that's good news. Whenever we're in any negative emotion or feeling, we are not conscious, which means that whatever we're upset about in a way, is not really true.
Which means that we can free ourselves
It's
from
liberation.
that pain.
It's liberation. So,
So
go ahead, my love.
so just to give you kind of a structure, right now we're going to give you some examples, and the structure of those examples includes trigger, reaction, and then results. And we've simplified. That's not all that is in a part or a pattern. That said, for you to start mapping your own parts and patterns, if you start to understand, okay, there's a trigger, then the part reacts, to that trigger, and then there's results from the reaction to the triggers. And by the way, one thing that when you look at the cycle of a part or a pattern, that cycle of trigger, reaction, and result, what it does is it's constantly revalidating the part. So whatever was experienced that then created the part or the pattern, when it goes through the cycle of being triggered, then reacting, and then getting the results, it continues to revalidate the part, that it should act the way it's acting, that it should think the way it's thinking, that it should feel the way it's feeling. Because it's from the part, it's like chicken or egg. Are you feeling this way and getting the results in your life because of a certain thing in the environment, or is it that you're feeling a certain way and you've internalized a certain part or pattern, and then that continues to give you the same results in life, and for you to believe the same things and feel the same things over and over and over again. So realizing that is very helpful, and all of these examples can help you see how that works. And then we're gonna expand and extend on parts and patterns, and give you other ways of understanding multidimensional aspects of parts and patterns.
Yeah, we're going to get really first. So first, we're just going to talk about the trigger, the reaction, and the results of patterns, and give you several examples of patterns. Then we're going to talk about them in far more detail, the different ingredients of patterns, so that you can map them fully. Because and that's the other obstacle I forgot to mention. The second obstacle is that people only uncover a part of the pattern. And just like if you're an archaeologist who's excavating carefully a specimen, an artifact, or the bones of an ancient animal, you must, to get the full picture of what the part or pattern is, or the animal, you must excavate the whole thing. And usually we only excavate like the tail, and we're holding the tail and like, yeah, I got the pattern.
Yeah, and by the way, this is very important because, so I'll take another metaphor. Think about a tree, and you're wanting to take the tree out of the place where it is and put it somewhere else or remove it. Well, the tree has many roots. And if you don't deal with all the roots, you cannot take the tree out. You cannot remove the tree, because it's going to have a root system that's still active. So it's the same with patterns. If you only uncover some of the dimensions and aspect of the part or pattern, and you don't do all of it, then it remains in place, or it even regrows. If you become aware of some of it and you work on that, and there's still roots in other ways, the pattern is going to, the other roots that you had started removing are going to regrow, and the pattern is going to stay in place because it wants to stay in place. It's important to understand, and Dexter was talking about not judging our patterns and our parts. It's important to understand that our parts, they're not bad or wrong. They're here as a survival mechanism. We've learned them, in a state of hypnosis, right? Oftentimes in childhood, and we believe that they will keep us safe. So we're very attached to our parts and patterns, even when we're not aware of them. And so we'll have the tendency not to want to comprehensively map them and understand them and discover them, because we're afraid of being without them. For instance, if someone has had the pattern when someone judges them to get angry as a way of feeling safe, right? If they're angry with someone who judges them, then they don't have to feel the judgment the same way. They can be in the reactive cycle of being angry at the person. And when we have such patterns, I forgot what I was talking about, why I brought that up.
Well,
so if we're in that reactive mode, right, and we go into anger, for instance, if we're being judged, it's a protective mechanism. So they're there to protect us, and we can be attached to them and want to keep them in place. And when we realize that, then we can be more motivated to really comprehensively map them and clear them.
So, some examples.
Yes.
There could be a pattern in a person that gets triggered when they get home and maybe a parent, and the house is dirty. And the reaction that they have is that they get angry and they yell at the kids. And the result is conflict and the kids feeling shame and guilt, and maybe even the parent for yelling. And the parent and the children experiencing misunderstanding, leading to disconnection. So that's one pattern. Here's another pattern. The trigger is perhaps watching TV. So we've been watching TV for so long with commercials of people who are, beautiful and in excellent shape, and so we've been conditioned, right? And then we see another commercial, and it shows, these supermodels, and we become triggered by the commercial. So that's the trigger. Then the reaction is that we put pressure on ourselves to be perfect, and then the result is that pressure from that the marketing and commercials put on people to be perfect causes them to be incapable of discovering their ego and their ego parts. Because how can a person really explore themselves and their fear and their anger and their judgments if they're trying to be perfect? So that's another pattern. Go ahead, my love.
Another pattern, for instance, we're having dinner, and we're eating some really delicious food. And we go into a pattern of overeating. We just can't stop eating the food. So the result of that is, we can judge ourselves, we can feel poorly physically, we can gain weight, we can come out of balance with ourselves. So the pattern is not conscious. The sensory stimuli, leads to us going into a reactive mode of eating, and then not being consciously aware of, where our limit is, what is optimal for our body, and then the results are the results that I described.
Then another pattern could start with a trigger of going on a date, and the person that we're dating says something that contradicts our family's beliefs or our family upbringing. Maybe they use a word that your mom and dad never liked, for example. And so the reaction in our system could be then to get turned off. Oh, maybe this isn't the person for me. And the result would be, judgment, of course, and difficulty finding love and finding a relationship. So that's another pattern.
Another one, for instance, the trigger being that you're connecting with someone, communicating with them, and there's a misunderstanding. And when the misunderstanding occurs, you feel stressed, you feel anxious, you feel, a sense of maybe being victimized, you want to blame, you feel, judgmental. And of course, when those kinds of, stresses and tension occurs, we can essentially start to project that the relationship is not good, or that we're not understood. That can affect our health, that can affect, the way that we experience reality as a whole.
We have a comment from Juan that says, I have a pattern of thinking I won't have enough money, and it makes me feel nervous. Excellent. And that's an excellent pattern that you can use, that you can discover more of in the practice that we're going to do in about 5 minutes.
And just as a beginning point, first you can begin by identifying the triggers, right? Then you see how the reaction is. The reaction is, I won't have enough money. And then, of course, if you were to believe that you won't have enough money, then you would start to make decisions. First of all, to imagine that that were true and to make decisions from that. And then the result would be, essentially more lack, right? When we think in terms of lack, then we experience lack and we make decisions from lack, and then we experience more lack. And so we're in that cycle. So going back to what I said earlier on, chicken or egg, the if lack was embodied, for instance, by a family member, right? They won't be enough. We won't have enough money, or something will be lacking. Then we internalize that, and then we experience reality through that which was modeled, embodied by, for instance, our parents. And then we continue to revalidate that and to experience more of it. So that realization can help you to work at the source. The source is the pattern. The source is the belief that the pattern holds. And then when you clear that belief, and it can be sometimes uncomfortable to do that because we're sitting in the energy of the pattern. And the pattern wants to tell us, yes, there's lack. There's lack. You've got to believe it. You've got to never forget that there is lack, so that you never run out of money, so that you never not have enough. That said, by holding that belief in place, you are in the energy of it, and you continue to revalidate it, reinforce it, relive it, re-experience it over and over and over again. I hope that's helpful.
Juan says thanks a lot with a heart. So a few other patterns. An ongoing fear of the process of life, including like health and money, that can trigger us into a pattern of just being consistently stressed and displeased with life and relationship and results. And the result of that is a low quality of life and relationship. Another pattern can come up when the trigger is having someone point something out about you. Oh, hey, I think you operate this way, and you're doing this, and it's hurting my feelings. So that's the trigger. Then the reaction can be feeling insecure, offended, afraid, and you can like maybe deny or reject that it's happening, rather than accepting and saying, oh, I never noticed that part of myself. Thank you. I see what you're saying.
I'll take a little example here. We often talk about Jiddu Krishnamurti, who we really appreciate. And
who's a spiritual teacher.
Yes, one time in one of his lectures, someone accused him of being in a rut, saying, oh, you're just in a rut, Krishnamurti. And instead of rejecting it, which is what most people, if you don't identify with what someone else is pointing out, and you get offended by it, and you imagine within your own mind the implications of being told that you're in a rut and what that means about you, etc., and you have a social image or a self-image that you're like, no, I don't want to be in a rut. I don't identify with that. So Krishnamurti, instead of rejecting it, explored it. He said, oh, am I in a rut? So he posed the question. He asked himself, am I in a rut? Could I be in a rut? And that's very helpful whenever someone is pointing out something, to realize, okay, well, they might be in projection mode, projecting themselves onto me, and what is it bringing up in me? Why is this coming up? What can I explore? What can I learn about myself from this process?
Are these teachings, are these comments, are these suggestions that we're sharing with you, are they connecting to you? Please let us know in the comments. So I think that's enough examples of parts and patterns. Thank you, Juan. Juan says, Yes. And Mark gives us a thumbs up. And we have a, oh yeah, baby from Mary Alice. Right on. So let us then do a quick meditation. Heather says, yes, thank you so much for your service. Thank you, Heather. So let us do a quick meditation, and we're going to guide you to do this for yourself. This is the hands-on part of the workshop. And Liz says, very helpful. Good. Thank you, Liz. And Heike says, thanks a lot. Hello, Heike. So let's begin this meditation.
Mm-hmm.
If you would.
So the meditation is about discovering our parts and patterns in a loving, non-judgmental, equanimous, neutral fashion.
And rather than trying to uncover all of them right now, we're just suggesting that you uncover one part or pattern that interferes with your potential to just be in your heart and in love with life, and loving every breath, all day, every day. So what? And you can start with, if you close your eyes and relax, and allow yourself from a sort of removed place to observe yourself, your past, your present, and your future, and your life as a whole. And ask yourself, what is a pattern that has been sort of getting in the way of me feeling love and peace and experiencing great results in my life?
A pattern that has brought about a state of reactivity, of stress, of survival. Becoming aware of that without judgment, in a neutral fashion.
And if you're having trouble, you can start with, what's your biggest pain in life? What's the biggest source of pain in your life? And follow the breadcrumbs of that to a pattern of yours.
Yeah, you can also ask, what keeps coming up? What keeps cycling over and over again without seemingly being either resolvable or, as of yet, not having been resolved? And as you bring it up, if you feel any negativity towards it, any sense of, that it's a problem, that it can be resolved, just allowing your heart to open, feeling yourself in the area of your heart, bringing your awareness there so that you can be more receptive, more open to working with this part.
And giving this part a name. It doesn't matter what the name is, just a name that you can refer to this part or pattern as. It can be a word or a few words.
And it can have a color or however you relate to it.
And then writing that name down on a piece of paper. And just gently, gradually coming back into this workshop, stepping out of the meditation. So now we're really getting to it. We've named it, okay? We've started to zoom in, right? We've looked at our life and we've found a part or pattern, and now we're going to zoom into it and we're going to really get to discover this part or pattern.
And by the way, this is very useful, the process of zooming in. That is what we do unconsciously when we're in a part of our pattern. It becomes us. When we're inside a part or a pattern, after we got triggered and we're reacting, we've zoomed in, and now all of life, all of self, all of everything, our relationships, is experienced through that part.
Yeah, we are basically, if the part or pattern is like a boat on the water, we're now on that boat, and we're believing and thinking and feeling and saying and doing whatever that part or pattern has learned from conditioning and things like that. So clearly that's a state of unconsciousness.
Yeah. And we've turned up the volume.
and it feels so strong and everything feels so real. What we're going to do now is we're going to actually, from our consciousness, zoom in on that process and look at it from outside of it and map it. We're going to hold it in our hands and look around and sort of map out all the dimensions of it. And here's how we're going to do it. We're going to give you right now the dimensions of a part or pattern. And this is a good list, and it's not a perfect list. So
yes, and if you find more as we go through that, if it brings another dimension for you, there's another aspect of part and pattern, please share it.
please do. So parts and patterns have a trigger, right? So it's like a context where they get triggered and then become dominant in our system, and then that's all we see. It really, being in a part or pattern is like putting on a set of virtual reality goggles. So what triggers it? What triggers it? Is it conflict? Is it relationship misunderstanding? Is it a messy house? Is it financial concerns? Is it receiving your bill? What triggers it?
Or just sensory input.
Is it a difficult communication at work or relationship at work? Is it some form of sensory input?
Mm-hmm. It can be as simple as a color, a shape, something that you smell.
A pain in your body. A pain in your body. You could have a pain in your heart, and you could think, oh my gosh, I'm having a heart attack. I'm gonna die. And really, it's just gas. So it's just an example. So there's the trigger. Then
And just to add, the trigger is what you've associated essentially with. So when you get triggered, it's because there was a prior association from that part with that input.
Right. So like a girl goes into an ice cream shop, and the man who's a man in a yellow shirt, yells at her really harshly for spilling the ice cream. The next time that girl walks by an ice cream shop, she's going to be triggered. And the next time that she sees a man in a yellow shirt, she'll likely be triggered too. And the next time she hears a man yelling, she'll be triggered. And she'll be triggered into that feeling that she felt, that fear that she felt when the man was yelling at her.
Yeah. And remember, triggered means not conscious, not present. So when we're in parts and patterns, we're not conscious nor present.
On the other hand, we're actually reliving the past. And we're not even reliving the true past. We're reliving our
interpretation of
the
past.
past.
What we recorded about the past.
Which is not the past. It's just an interpretation. So then these would really misinterpretations, because they're incomplete, continue to fuel our suffering. And you could say that misinterpretations are at the core of all suffering, interestingly enough. So a trigger. So what is the trigger? If you write down in your journal, what is the trigger you have a part or pattern that you're working on. What's the trigger for that part or pattern?
And they can be multiple triggers.
You can write multiple. So that once you've done that, and I feel that you've probably done that while we're speaking, what role do you go into? Do you go into like a parent role, like an authority figure? Like the parent that comes home and sees the kitchen messy will go into a parent role. Like, this is unacceptable.
Or you can go into a child part.
You can go, yeah.
And you feel very afraid and like you've done something wrong or something that you're being bad.
So when your partner gets upset with you, you might go into a child part and feel very weak and dependent and avoidant. You might go into a victim role. You might go into a perpetrator role, which is, aggressive and attacking in a verbal way, perhaps. You might go into a rescuer role, trying to rescue a person or a situation, or a fixer. You might become a fixer, trying to just fix stuff, trying to fix it, trying to make the problem and the pain go away.
Or you might go into a male part or a female part. Those are also roles that we learn through society. Either that's how men would react in this situation, or that's how women. And it doesn't matter which gender we are, if we're male or female, or it's really about what we've identified with in terms of roles. Like, for instance, some people can believe that if they're in certain situations, uh, they should act in a male dominant way or in a female dominant way, meaning in accordance with what the collective consciousness of male or female tells us we should be doing in this situation.
So, like, here's an example, right? Like a child drops a glass and it breaks on the floor. The male will say, might get upset and be like, "Oh, darn it! You dropped the glass again. Step back so you don't get hurt." And they like start yelling and get real instead of like, "Oh, let me help you with that." So another example is sometimes a man will go into a feminine role and a woman will go into a masculine role. We see a lot of that these days in business, women becoming more masculine.
And again, that will depend on what was modeled for them and embodied by their parents, and what was, if you've seen our workshop on Stockholm Syndrome, what we've internalized as a safety strategy to feel like we're safe in the world. So whatever mom or dad modeled or somebody else modeled for us, that then led us to feel like we're safe. Doesn't mean that we are. That said, if the energies of mom or dad were, or anybody else were sending a certain signal, then we would have said, okay, well, I'm not safe in this situation. For instance, I'll give you an example. If someone is raised with a father that is male dominant and yells and gets angry, the child can learn that in order to be safe, they need to do that. That's the way back to safety, by yelling, by being angry, by being dominant
or stressed.
So then the child feels like, oh, well, in those situations I should get angry, I should yell, and I should be dominant, because that's the only way that I can feel safe.
Yeah, and that's the thing about parts and patterns. It's pretty mind-blowing when you realize that the negative emotions that we complain about are actually life coping strategies that some part of ourselves is using on purpose in order to feel safe. So when we feel hatred or sadness or anger, it's actually a strategy that a subconscious part of ourselves is using to feel safe, because hey, that's what it learned from mom or dad.
That's what you do in this situation. That's what's safe.
So and by the way, you mentioned a workshop recording. We do have workshop recordings of our workshops on our website, and so you have access to all of those. So that being said, let's continue. We've done the trigger. Yes, if you yes, you got. Mary Alice asked if she could send this workshop to her daughter, so now she knows that it's on our website. It will be on our website. Give us a few days for this one. It takes us a little while to upload. So the trigger, that's one part of a pattern. The role, that's another part of the pattern. The emotion, so like, what are the emotions you feel when you're in that pattern? Hey, you could have some patterns that feel really happy, and they're still patterns and they're not necessarily optimal. Have you ever been with someone who's so high on happiness, so ungrounded, that it's like you can't reach them, that they're not really there with you?
Yeah, so it's not a conscious, balanced form of happiness. It's actually a coping mechanism, because they feel in pain, and in order to get a sense of being in alignment with the identity that they've created around themselves of being a happy person, for instance, they'll stay in that high state while there's a bunch of different unconscious painful memories that are processing through their system.
Exactly. And that high state is like a way to separate themselves from their own pain. So the emotion can be anything. It's not just negative emotions. There's happiness, there's sadness, there's anger, there's lack, which we could call a form of emotion. There's fear and frustration. Whatever the emotion is for your pattern. Trinity says, and then there's the ancestral. Absolutely. So I'll skip to another part, which is the source, right? The source is something that you can map. You can map to a childhood experience. You can map to an ancestral experience, like in family constellations. You can map to past lives if you choose to. You can map to societal conditioning and collective consciousness. So all of this is now starting to give you a much more bigger understanding and multidimensional understanding of this part or pattern, so that you can actually not even go into it, catch it before it comes up, and avoid it completely, so to speak.
By the way, since Dexter brought up past lives, for instance, um, when we, if you're interested in doing a past life regression, we have one on Insight Timer, and that process is very facilitative of uncovering parts and patterns that originate in childhood, because the regression goes back in time. So it takes you from this moment in time back into your childhood and then back into a past life. And that's very facilitative of actually consciously becoming aware of parts and patterns and having this process of integration and resolution of parts and patterns.
Julie, I see your comment. I just don't understand it. I think it's a joke because you said just kidding. How pause run away? What, I think you might have mistyped pause. So I'll keep an eye on that. So other parts of patterns, other dimensions of patterns. So we have so far trigger, and you should have ideally
Identified your own.
identified
your
your own. So
triggers,
your trigger for this pattern that you're working on.
the roles that you play when you, because it can be multiple roles, the emotion that you feel or the emotions that you feel, the source, right? Where is it coming from? Whether you might be aware of that or not, or it might come as you work with the pattern. You might start remembering, oh wait, dad always used to yell and be angry. That's where I learned it. Of course, dad learned it somewhere too. So those patterns are handed down generation after generation.
So, and yes, all of this is going to teach you, yes, Julie, how not to react, how not to be triggered, essentially. There won't be a pattern there to get triggered. Or if it's there, if after you've done this mapping, you should be far more capable with your consciousness to look at it, see it, and before it even unfolds, to recognize that it is unconscious and to go a different path. And that can be the difference between a long marriage and divorce. Truly. A successful business and not. If we make those decisions,
being abundant or not, being healthy or not, because
changing our fate and not, because patterns can typically determine our fate. The patterns we pick up, if we become capable of doing this, that we're guiding you through, you get to change your fate, because your parts and patterns that you picked up from your parents, your karmas, are no longer the only thing defining your life. You have your free will and your consciousness with you.
And I want to bring something up that I think is a really incredible example. In the context of family constellation, we've worked with people who, at the same age as their parents, went through either a bankruptcy, went through a divorce, went through an illness. And so when we realize that we're conditioned subconsciously to the parts and patterns of our parents, and to the point where, like I said, like when you do a family constellation process, you realize, oh, at the same age that this happened to my grandfather or to my, to my parent or to, someone in my family that I'm aware of, I'm having this same experience. And so this is wonderful, because when we realize that, then we don't, and we're empowered with tools to clear the patterns and the parts, then we don't have to go down that same that same path as our parents or grandparents did.
I see a comment that says from Mary Alice, I have much remorse of old patterns and behaviors because I did the hurt I've caused in my relationships, and so much I wanted only to be loved, and so much wanted only love. I think what was There's a little bit of a typo.
Some of them.
Oh, and so much wanted to only show love.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And that's a very helpful share. Thank you for sharing that. And it's vulnerable, and it helps us reach you in these workshops and help you. So thank you. Um, First, the remorse itself is a pattern. You see, if the remorse goes away, the whole thing goes away. Remorse is a form, is a pattern that helps us, that supposedly is supposed to help us cope with our fear. That's it, it doesn't. So we have this fear of having been wrong or having been bad, and then we feel remorse, which is really a process of self-judgment, of self-punishment, of continuing to blame ourselves for things in the past.
With the subconscious intention of it not happening again. So if we have, accumulated a lot of recordings and misunderstanding about things we've done in the past based on our patterns and parts, and we fear that, that hurt that was felt, that was experienced in that process by ourselves and others will continue, then we will hold on to the remorse, to the regret, instead of clearing it, healing it, and realizing we are accountable for our patterns and we're not responsible for our patterns and parts. They are handed down generation after generation. And if, it's important to realize that if you had known what you know now, you would not have operated from that pattern. So we always do our best, and with the information that we have available. And if we look back in the past and said, well, I should have known, I should have done it better, I should not have done what I did, then we're not comprehensively, unconditionally, lovingly understanding. And therefore we stay in that same cycle where those same patterns that we have regrets and remorse over can continue to exist, because we're in a cycle of judgment instead of a cycle of introspection and exploration. For instance, Krishnamurti, when the person said, you're in a rut, he didn't feel bad about it. He explored it. Oh, okay, I have this pattern. Let me look. Is it there? What is it? Where is it coming from? Why is it there? What is its function? So instead of being in remorse, when we break down and dismantle this pattern of being in remorse or regret, then we can really look at what is and why it's there and how to stop being in those patterns.
Yes, this pattern of remorse is a great pattern to apply this entire process that we're sharing with you to. And Mary Alice follows up with, this makes good sense. Good, thank you. We're glad. Less remorse and more acceptance. Namaste. Yes, and realizing what remorse truly is. That remorse is taught to us to be something that good people do when they do bad things. That's how it's taught to us. And and we're taught to feel remorse when we've supposedly done bad things. Well, here's the thing. No one ever does necessarily bad things. People are not bad. They inherit patterns and then operate from those patterns. And it's humanity's process of evolution. That's just what it is. To in that process, learn through our patterns.
Yeah, so lack of consciousness, it's not about being bad or wrong. It's about,
being in a learning process of attaining consciousness.
Lacking information and tools to apply yourself consciously to whatever arises in your life.
So there is no bad person. There is no bad thing that was done. There was people doing their best, people in pain, people in patterns, people who are conditioned. And then from that, people then, bump heads. And some people walk away feeling like, oh, I forgive that person completely. They were just in pain. That had nothing to do with me. And that's wonderful. And other people walk away with hurt. And I'm saying this because, Mary Alice, you specifically mentioned the hurt that you've caused. And we would suggest that you've caused no hurt. That actually when people walk away feeling hurt, it's not because you've caused it. because we can't cause anyone to feel anything. People, through their process of interpretation,
get triggered,
get and do their make things personal, and then feel hurt. So a conscious person would say, "Well, this person's afraid and they're in pain, and I understand and I forgive them, and that had nothing to do with me." An unconscious person, who's, to some degree everybody, who's still learning to release parts and patterns, would operate from a part and pattern and feel hurt and say, "You caused me hurt. You caused me pain. You were mean to me. You said all these hurtful things. You did all these hurtful things. Like you don't care." And now this person would carry this. Well, whose responsibility is it, or opportunity is it, to release that memory, to release that misunderstanding, and to actually look back and see, oh, Mary Alice was actually in pain and suffering and had patterns, and just like everyone, and I love her unconditionally. Believe it or not, it's through the process of conflict, through the process of us bumping heads with each other, through the process of us making these recordings of, oh, Mary Alice was mean to me and she hurt me, and carrying that for the rest of our lives or throughout our lives, that we learn to actually release that and to actually take full accountability and realize, no, Mary Alice didn't cause me hurt. And I've never caused anyone hurt. That's a pattern. And I've been living life from this pattern that believes that people hurt me and that I've hurt people. And that's not true. And that, coming to that realization, frees people from all anger and hatred and regret and guilt and shame and remorse, and then allows people to unconditionally love each other. So really, nothing bad has happened except for the process of life, where we learn to love, where we all have the opportunity to learn that. So these past 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes that we've been talking can help anyone with guilt or shame or regret or remorse to make peace with whatever decisions they made in the past, and to forgive themselves, and to realize that they didn't cause hurt to anyone, not directly, and to realize that we're all a part of this process. Like some say, our wonderful teacher gave us this metaphor of that life is like a rock tumbler, and we get in as these very sharp and jagged rocks, into this like drum, into this big bucket, and all this, each one of us is a rock, and then life is like a process of moving that rock tumbler and getting all the rocks to bump into each other until they all come out as beautiful, smooth, round stones. So the hurt that happens in that process is just a part of the process of us becoming smooth and round and whole and beautiful and loving. And it is a part of the process. So all shame, all judgment, all guilt, all remorse, all regret are patterns that we can heal and release. Shall we keep going? Okay, so for whatever pattern you're working on, you should have mapped the trigger, the role, the emotion, and the source. Now, you can also write down the fear, and there might be multiple. What is the fear that you feel when you experience that pattern? And a fear is a projection of pain from the past onto the future. A projection of pain to the past, pain from the past onto the future. So no fear is real, because it's coming from the past, and the future is new. So whatever the fear is, write it down, and then
identify any belief that's associated with the pattern. For instance, the belief that I won't have enough money, or I'm never going to get better, like if someone is sick, or all men are bad, or all women are bad, or whatever else, in that pattern when you're reacting, whatever else you're believing, right? So the story you're telling yourself when you're in the part or the pattern. Then are there any expectations that are tied, to the pattern and to the way that you're feeling and reacting?
Yeah. Does the pattern cause you to expect anything about yourself, anything from life, anything from other people? This.
Or is the pattern a reactive process from that stems from an expectation that you have? For instance, if someone expects someone else to treat them a certain way, to behave a certain way, might they go into a reactive pattern of judgment and anger and blame of someone who's not treating them that way? So they would have an expectation, oh, people should treat me this way. And then they meet people who have patterns and parts, and it might not unfold in the way that they imagine or would have preferred, and then it triggers their pattern.
Julie says, uh, she's saying that she has a belief that I have to be in control or I won't be safe. Excellent. Creating the expectation that you can control everything. So, or the expectation that you should be in control, and that if you're not, that then you're unsafe. So excellent, excellent, excellent work, and that's exactly how the ego works. So well done. So judgment. So there's going to be a judgment. So this pattern is going to have probably a pattern is going to have several judgments. It's going to judge situations where, like, if a pattern is about lack in finance, it's going to judge the bills. It might judge the amount of money you have in your bank account as not enough. So
then you can notice also the language that part or pattern speaks from. It can have its own way, even the tone of voice. So if it's in your mind and you're playing it out in your mind, notice the language, notice the words, notice the tone, notice the energy with which this pattern is basically surfacing, and how it's playing out.
Yeah, excellent. They do have, you can hear actually in your mind the tone of voice that part of you speaks to yourself from. You might hear like, oh, it's like a harsh tone of voice, like your parent spoke to you, or it could be anything. It's up to you. It's different for each person and each pattern.
Yeah, and you might notice that it's a bit like a broken record. It will say the same thing. Like, for instance, if you have a pattern of feeling like you might lack money, it might say, I'm going to run out of money. I'm never going to be able to do something to get more money, or whatever it is that that pattern is experiencing, and therefore voicing out, even if it's in your mind in the form of thoughts.
And by the way, the language can also help you trace it back to the source. So the language might sound rather 16th century, or it might sound just like your parent. And the language will also help you find a role. Find if you're playing a role.
If you're in a child part, for instance,
or
a victimized, perspective, you will hear it.
Or an authority figure, like unacceptable. That's a clear sign of being in an authority or a parent part. So then the next dimension of a pattern is an attachment. Usually a pattern is going to be attached to something or some outcome. So what is your pattern attached to?
Or averse to.
And then aversion is the next one. What is it averse to?
What doesn't it want to happen?
What does it hate?
What is it trying to avoid, to escape, to suppress, to repress?
Then there's, when you're in this pattern, what do you think of, what do you remember, and what do you do, and what do you say?
So what action springs, whether it's in thought, in emotion, in words, in deeds, what action springs from that pattern? What is it doing? How does it manifest?
And then the last dimension is, what are the implications of this pattern on your life? What are the results that it leads to?
So for instance, if we believe, that we're not going to have more money, then most likely until we've released the pattern, we'll be stuck in different choices and decision makings that revalidate that, where there's always this feeling of lack.
Or if we try to be in control in order to be safe, the implication of that is that we're unlikely to ever, it's going to be hard to have peace. It's going to be hard to accept outcomes that aren't what we prefer.
And to be conscious, because if we feel unsafe, and we're operating from control strategies and safety strategies, we're not in a conscious state, and therefore we're acting, not present, not conscious, not aware.
So that's it. Those are the dimensions, and we'll repeat them. A trigger, a role, an emotion, a fear, belief, expectation, a judgment, language, attachment, aversion, what you do and say, implications, and a source. Once you've taken a part of yourself or a pattern and understood it through these lenses, then you're going to have such a more 360-degree view, comprehensive view and understanding of this part or pattern.
Yeah, and by the way, this is very important because, again, when there's an emotional charge, an emotional component to patterns that renders us like almost a victim to our parts and patterns. So we can feel like, oh, I don't know what to do. I keep making the same choices. I keep feeling the same way, and this keeps happening. And, once you've really sat with, those different understandings about patterns and parts, now you're not stuck. You're not a victim to them. You're no longer going to react from them, because now you know how to look at them, how to map them, how to understand them, how to forgive them, how to heal them and deconstruct them.
And recognize them proactively before they come up or as they're coming up. So very few people do this. Very few people actually sit and understand their parts at this level. And this is an opportunity for you if you want to do it. And you can get to truly know thyself. And when we say know thyself, we're talking about mapping your entire ego so you can be free from all ego, because ego is the root of all pain, suffering, and conflict and unconsciousness. And then once you've done that, you can experience consciousness and unconditional love and freedom. And it's a process. It's not a race. And you don't need to get there tomorrow. And every little part that you work on brings some improvement. So I think that we could end with a little meditation.
Yes, and also, are we still aligned with doing the workshop in 2 weeks with healing?
Yes, Emma said yes, my love.
Okay.
In a few weeks, we're gonna.
So in 2 weeks, at the moment we're doing workshops every 2 weeks. It's our intention to actually. Today was about discovering parts and patterns, and in 2 weeks we'll look at clearing and healing parts and patterns, and how to do that. And we'll give you different methods to be able to clear parts and patterns.
Yep. And Emma just made an excellent comment. Thank you, Emma. To add, where do you feel it in the body? Absolutely. That's a crucial element. Where do you feel it in the body?
Yeah.
Not just where, like arms, legs, because you could write that down, but also actually literally mapping, like in a way that you can't even do on paper, like what it feels like. Because it may include subtle tingles here and subtle tingles here, and a little bit like to the right on the back side of the heart, and a little bit in the buttocks, and a little bit in the knee, like just, and a little bit of heat, and the heart beating a little faster. However you can get in deeply, fully in touch with the feeling of the pattern. That is incredibly important, because then you can feel the pattern when you're in it, and then you can know, oh, I'm in a pattern.
Yeah, and then you're more able to work with the energy that's underlying, because a pattern is organized energy. And in 2 weeks, when we work on clearing and healing patterns, we will go into that. We will go into where in the body it's been stored, and where in the body is it reactively coming up, and also being able to follow where it goes, because the energy is going to move as you work with it. So
how do you feel about doing a meditation now, where a short one where we combine the feeling of the pattern with the vision of the pattern that we've attained through this practice?
I think that's great.
Okay.
I'll let you lead it.
Okay. Glad to hear there can be healing. Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh. there's so many parts and patterns that that we have worked on healing within ourselves. And yes, Trinity, I will. That we have worked on healing within ourselves that and we basically changed who we are and our identity. It's changed. And all can experience that. And certainly most likely you have experienced that in different ways. And counting your progress, counting how you change is really important. Laurette, thank you for your question about whether we have a course. Right now, we're in the process of building a one course, one path that will guide you through many, many, many understandings that combined will give you a wonderful capacity to heal and to love your life and to be more conscious. And for now, what we do have is a bunch of prior workshops.
Yeah, and a gratitude course. So we have a 10-day gratitude course.
And those are available on our website, the prior workshops. Some of them are free, some of them are $10, some of them are $21. And together, they do more together than just stand alone. Laurette says, wonderful, you have so much to offer. Thank you, Laurette. Juan says, this brings me so much clarity and heart. Thank you, Juan. And Trinity wants me to repeat the list again. So the list is a trigger, a role, not A, because there can be multiple. So triggers, roles, emotions, fears, beliefs, expectations, judgments, language, attachments, aversions, what you do and say, implications, and sources, and what it feels like in the body.
And where you feel it.
In the body.
Yeah, and that will be available, in the recording. So
Emma says, you are both wonderful. Thank you. So are all of you. Those that did participate and those that are behind the scenes not commenting. You are all wonderful. And Mariella says, I stumbled upon this live course and know how deeply we are all connected. Truly. So let's close our eyes and do a quick meditation, taking a relaxing breath and releasing all tension and all pain. And allowing yourself to connect to the pattern or part that you were working on today. Allowing yourself to feel it in your body in a conscious way. Observing what that pattern feels like in your body. And becoming familiar with the feeling of this unconscious pattern.
And intending or choosing not to react or judge, to simply observe, to feel, to see, to experience whatever is surfacing right now as you pay attention, as you place your awareness on the pattern.
And as you feel this pattern, allow yourself to begin to draw connections, draw lines between the pattern, the feeling of the pattern, and all of its components. See these connections springing forth. So drawing connections between the way it feels in your body and the triggers that bring it up. And then drawing connections and lines from the feeling and the triggers to the roles that you go into when you're in this pattern. A parent role, a child role. And then drawing connections to the emotions that you feel when you're in this pattern. And what it feels like in your body.
And connecting the dots to any fear that's associated with that pattern or any belief or expectation.
And seeing it all together, connected as one, this entire pattern, connecting the dots, seeing this entire pattern from a 360-degree view, comprehensively, as if you could look all around and through this pattern and see it all.
Yeah, and maybe even visualizing a model, a 3D model of the pattern as you explore it right now.
And connecting that model, that intellectual model, to the feeling of the pattern in your body. And getting in touch with any attachments and aversions that the pattern has, and
any language, any words that it uses.
And what you do and say when you're in this pattern, and any memories of times in which you operated from this pattern. And the results you got, the implications of it. And any sources of this pattern. Maybe you see a parent that used to operate from it, or whatever the sources might be.
Maybe you're aware of an ancestor or a family member that also operated from this pattern, or maybe you become aware that it stems from a past life, something you've experienced before, and that is still influencing you. Just becoming aware of all these different dynamics and sources and the way that it plays out, as if you were watching a little movie of it as you experience it.
And as an optional ending to this meditation, if you would visualize the palms of your hands glowing white, just glowing white, and in the palms of your hands, in the palms of your loving hands, you are holding this pattern. And you're looking at it, and you're feeling it, and you're recognizing it to be just an unconscious pattern, just energy that is organized into the shape and structure of this pattern. A pattern that you can release, a pattern that you can heal, a pattern that you can clear. And as you hold this pattern in the palms of your hands, of your white hands, your white glowing hands, if you would allow light from spirit or from any source, from your heart or your hands, whatever you prefer, to shine onto this pattern and to dissolve it completely in the light, so that there's nothing left in your hands. And this process has helped you to understand the pattern, to perceive the pattern, to become more conscious of the pattern, to heal and clear many, many aspects, perhaps the whole pattern. And this process now has helped you be far more free from this pattern. And you have regained your free will choice in the situations where this pattern used to arise. You have gained the capacity for consciousness in those situations. And recognizing that you have the capacity to do this for any and all patterns, and to be free of all patterns. And connecting to what that might feel like. To be free of all patterns. To be able to fill your entire body, your entire experience of life, with pure joy and love and inner peace. Because there are no patterns in the way. To be able to fill your entire body with the light of love, joy, and inner peace. And to live life from your heart. To love yourself your life and all beings, all the time, because there are no patterns in the way. And to when people are mean or rude, to be able to see their pain and understand and forgive. And whenever you might be upset or mean or rude, to be able to see your pain and understand and forgive. And if you would take a few breaths of pure white light that fill your lungs and your heart, asking that you gain the most benefit and the most healing from this experience and in future. And if when you're ready, you could gently open your eyes. Trinity says, and thank you for being affordable too. You're welcome, Trinity. That is our intention. And if you would please share any of our work with other people, if you think it would help them, that would be helpful for us to keep the prices low. And Veronica says, thank you. Lots of love to you both. Thank you, Veronica. Lots of love to you. And Heike says, thank you so really much. You're so really welcome. And thank you, Heike.
Yeah, thank you to all of you. And if you enjoyed the workshop and you'd like to donate to this workshop, to us, and to Insight Timer, we really appreciate it.
Emma says, just had a huge aha moment. Good. That's all we want for you, is to have your aha moments. That is what we want to do, is just hold the space for you to have aha moments. So that's great. And that bring love and joy to your life. So God bless. Wishing you the very best. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming today, for being here with us. And we hope that you join the next workshop and that it's helpful to you.
Thank you, Julie. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Mary Alice. Thank you, Veronica, for your donations. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Trinity.